أهلا وسهلا فيكم ببدو تريد. اليوم عنا نقل مباشر لكلمة جيروم باول رئيس الاحتياطي الفيدرالي وديفيد روبنشتاين. عندهم اليوم مقابلة. ديفيد روبنشتاين هو رئيس الاقتصادي النادي الاقتصادي بواشنطن. المقابلة اليوم رح تكون معه. هلا في مخاوف بالأسواق اللي رح نراقبها كمان، ونراقب التشارتس شو رح يصير فيها من وراء الفيد اوفيشلز. كثير معالم ما بيقولوا انه الفيد اوفيشلز رح يعملوا ري اساس، رح يرجعوا يعيدوا دراسة الوضع بعد أرقام الوظائف، يمكن يبلش زيادة الفوائد وقتها. بدنا ننتظر ونشوف شو الوضع بشكل عام. ولكن أنا رح وافيكم وترجم لكم كل شيء أول بأول. خلينا نشوف شو عم بيصير. رح يبلشوا.
Can I have your attention, please? Can I have your attention? Okay, thank you. So, as I think everybody knows, our special guest is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, who has now completed 5 years as chairman as of 2 days ago, your 5th year, and now been on the Fed board for almost 12 years. So, Jay, thank you very much for being here. And why don't we start with an easy question?
بلش الأسئلة.
You made a speech last week commenting on the FOMC's decision to raise the Fed discount rate by a small amount, relatively speaking, 25 basis points. Some people would say that was small. But at the time, it wasn't clear that the jobs report would be as strong as it turned out to be subsequently. Had you known that the jobs report was going to be as strong, would you have done
دغري أسئلة قوية.
points or something different?
David, thank you for that question, and thank you for inviting me here today. It's great to be here. So we don't get to play it that way, unfortunately. We have to, but I'll take it this way. So the message we were sending at the FOMC meeting last Wednesday was really that the disinflationary process, the process of getting inflation down, has begun, and it's begun in the goods sector, which is about a quarter of our economy. But it has a long way to go. These are the very early stages of disinflation. So the services sector, really, except for housing services, pardon me, is not really showing any disinflation yet. So our message really was this process is likely to take quite a bit of time. It's not going to be, we don't think, smooth. It's probably going to be bumpy. And so we think that we're going to need to do further rate increases, as we said, and we think that we'll need to hold policy at a restrictive level for a period of time. Then comes the labor market report for January. And it's very strong. It's certainly stronger than anyone I know expected. And so, but I would say, we didn't expect it to be this strong, but I would say it kind of shows you why we think that this will be a process that takes a significant period of time. The labor market's extraordinarily strong. And by the way, it's a good thing that inflation has started to come down without it. That has not happened at the
اليد العاملة كتير قوية. التضخم بلش ينزل بالرغم من هالشيء.
Labor market, financial conditions have tightened significantly since then.
So let me ask it another way. So, by the way, when the numbers coming out, the job numbers, 519,000 jobs, does anybody call you up in the government and give you a little heads up this is going to happen, or they never do that?
حدا بدق لك بخبرك شو بيصير بالارقام الوظائف قبل ما يطلعوا.
Just the night before, and it's only me, and so, but not on all pieces of data. It's a very small.
حدا بيعطيني معلومات بسيطة.
For example, if we were going to get a big piece of data in the middle of an FOMC meeting, as often happens on the day of an FOMC meeting, it will help me to know it the night before.
Okay, so the markets, after your speech last week, the markets assumed that therefore there would probably be another 25 basis point increase in your.
الأسواق سعرت إنه رح يكون في 25 نقطة زيادة الشهر اللي جاي بعد اجتماعك الأخير. وتكون الأخير.
Was that we believe that we anticipate, is what we said, that ongoing rate increases will be appropriate.
هو اللي قلنا إنه نحن بنشوف الزيادات الفوايد رح تضلها ما قال لإمتى.
Down to 2% over time, and we don't think we've achieved that yet.
هدفنا
Having
نوصل
said that,
للتضخم بنسبة
now you
2%
see the
وبعد ما
labor
وصلنا
market
له.
report, and I think again financial conditions are more well aligned with that than they were before.
So the assumption when you made your speech was that probably the Fed might even consider decreasing rates by the end of
رح
this year.
طلع
Markets no longer
شو عم
assume
يصير
that. Do you think the
بالتشارتس نحن
markets
وعم
are
نحضر.
wrong?
Well, so let me say these are all of these numbers that we're throwing around here are conditional on incoming data and what happens. So we never say this is what we think will happen. We make a tentative forecast and then we let the data
نحن
come in.
بنعمل
For
توقعات ما
example,
بنعرف 100%
if the
شو رح
data were to
يصير،
continue to come in stronger than we
وكل ما
expect,
يجينا
and we were
المعلومات
to conclude that
بنعمل
we needed to
القرارات.
raise rates more than is priced into
هلا
the markets or
إذا
that were
القرارات
in
عم
that
نشوف
group of forecasts in December,
عم
then
نشوف
we would
الأرقام
certainly
أقوى، هي
certainly
بيعطينا
raise rates
الحجة
again.
لنزيد الفوائد على فترة أطول.
So today, for people who aren't familiar with the FOMC, who actually is on the FOMC?
So the U.S. Central Bank consists of a board of governors here in Washington. There are 7 governors. Those governors are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and we serve terms that are not synced up with the election cycle. So we're independent. There are also 12
نحن
reserve
مستقلين
banks
عن
around the
غير،
country which have a degree of independence, and
وفي
each reserve
بنوك
bank is led
مركزية
by a
عالمية
president
كمان
or
عندهم
reserve bank.
سلطتهم
All 12 of
الخاصة.
them sit on the FOMC. So that's 19 people sit on the FOMC. So it's quite a large committee, of which 12 vote in any given year. The Reserve Bank presidents vote on a rotating basis, except New York, which votes every year.
So when you vote, do you vote at the beginning of an FOMC meeting and then just kind of have discussions afterwards, or do you wait till the very
بنصوت
end and then you vote?
بأول اجتماع
No, we
FOMC
vote at the
meeting عم
end. I mean,
يتسألوا ولا لا؟
the FOMC meeting process takes, more than a full week. I'm talking to all of the participants, all 18 other ones, and staff
شكرا
send
أخي
around
سنايبر.
memos, and there's something called the Teal Book, which is the staff's assessment of the economy and international economy and monetary policy and all that. Then we have an extensive discussion.
بنحضر بالإف او ام سي،
Morning, the
بنحضر
first day
حالنا
about the
شي جمعة
economy.
قبل،
Everybody talks
وبعدين
about that.
بنقعد مع
On the
بعضنا
second day,
بنجتمع
we talk about
وبنحكي
monetary
عن
policy,
المواضيع
and
اللي
then we vote on
محضرينها.
monetary policy at around noon on the second day.
So does the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board speak first and say, here's what I think? Or
بوم
does he
لك
wait
من
until the
العمود
end and
لك.
say, well, thanks for what you think, but let me tell you what I think? What do you do,
So
first or last?
different chairs have done it different ways, and so I've tended to do what my immediate predecessor did. I think. Well, this is what I do. I speak last on the sort of the economic go around. So everyone else talks about what
هو
they
شو
think about the
بيعمل
economy
باجتماع
in
الاف
their
ام سي؟ هو
district or
اخر
their
واحد بيحكي
president.
بعد ما كلهم
And I
يحكوا.
listen to all that, and then I
هيك
give my comments,
المسؤول اللي
and then
قبله
I
كان
sum up
يعمل.
what people have said, and then I speak first on monetary policy.
وبالنسبة للسياسات النقدية هو بيحكوا أول واحد.
Inflation rate target is 2%. But why 2% and not 3%? 3%.
هدف التضخم يوصل ل 2%، ليه 2% مش 3%؟
Why do you want 2%?
ليه بدك
2%
2%؟
is the global standard, and that is
2%
our
هي
2%
هو
as
المستوى
measured by the
العالمي.
PCE index, and that's not something we're looking at changing. That isn't going to change.
ما رح نغير هالشيء.
Not going to change now.
غريب، بس كل شيء
Okay, so
ثاني
you need to
بغيره.
get to
طريقة
2%,
حساب
but your
السي
goal
بي
to
اي
get there
تغيرت.
is by what period of time would you like to get there?
Well, we say that we're using our tools to get there over time. If you look at our forecasts, we expect 2023 to be a year of significant declines in inflation, and it's actually our job to make sure that that's the case.
بيشوفوا سنة 2023 سنة هبوط التضخم بشكل كتير كبير.
Headline PCE inflation is running about 5%. This is on a 12-month basis. Core is running at 4.4. My guess is it will take certainly into not just this year, but next year to get down close to 2%.
Okay, so 2% is firm. You're not going to get off that.
2% رقم ثابت ما هدفه
The theory
ينزل عليه.
of raising interest rates is that it will decrease economic activity and increase unemployment. But you've been increasing interest rates for a while, and unemployment is now at a record low. So what's wrong with the theory? Why is unemployment not going higher?
Well, the labor market is strong because the economy is strong. And
اليد العاملة ما عم تهبط بالرغم من كل شيء عم تعمله. اليد العاملة قوية، جاوبوا باول، لأنه الاقتصاد قوي.
It's just that there's a lot of demand for workers. In fact, if you look at the supply of workers versus demand for workers, demand for U.S. workers is now more than 5 million greater than the available
الطلب
supply. And the available
الطلب على
supply
الوظائف
consists of
بأمريكا
people who are
أكبر
either
بكتير
working
من
or
العرض
actively looking for
العرض
employment. So
الطلب
this was
أكبر
not the
بكتير
case
من
before
الموجود
the
بالسوق.
pandemic. The pandemic
هذا شيء كتير إيجابي
really had
خاصة
a
بعد الأزمة
significant
اللي
left
شفناها.
a lasting mark so far on labor supply in the United States. The labor force participation rate came down, and there now is a shortage of workers. And
إيه أخي
it
أحمد
feels, it
رشيدي
almost
بتمنى
feels more
الجميع يعملوا
structural than
لايكات. أنا
cyclical. So
صراحة
that's
الساعة
a
4 وجه
significant
الصبح إذا
You
بتطلعوا على
persisted, I think,
الشاشة
saying
الساعة
what
4
unemployment
وجه
rate would
الصبح عم
be
بنقلكم هذا.
acceptable
استعملوا
to
لايك
you, you
وممنونكم.
think. But is there an unemployment rate that you think would moderate
لايك
inflation
وسبسكرايب.
such that you would tolerate unemployment at 4%, 5%, 6%?
I guess I think
أي
about it this
درجة فيك
way.
تتحمل
You know,
البطالة؟
we have two goals that Congress has assigned us:
عندي
maximum
هدفين من
employment and
الكونغرس.
price stability. Price stability, as we've agreed, is 2% inflation. Maximum employment
2%
means if you want a job, you
تضخم.
can get one. So right now, the labor market is at least at maximum employment. Many would say that it is out of balance with more demand than there is supply. So what we're trying to do is get inflation down. We're not targeting
إيه هذا
a
البث لايف أحمد.
unemployment rate. We're trying to use our tools to get inflation to come down over time.
In
هدفنا
hindsight,
نوطي
would you say
الطبقة.
that when COVID hit the economy and we injected $5 trillion of fiscal policy into the economy, and the Fed did quantitative easing
طايرة
and
يلا
other related things, kept interest rates very low, would you say in hindsight that was a mistake or
ليك
was the
ملا
right
شمعة
policy at the time?
أخضر هون فاتت على
I
السوق
think you have
على
to go back
كلمته.
to the decisions that were made in
طبعا
real
في
time.
الشمعة الفوليوم اللي فات على السوق أول ما بلش كلمته فوليوم مخيف. هذا
People were talking about depression. People were talking, and we didn't
العالم
think
كانت عم
we had
تحكي
no
عن
idea when
ركود
we would get
اقتصادي.
vaccines that worked. So Congress took very strong measures, and we took very strong
100%
measures.
دكتور
And
ناصر.
you see where the economy is. You've got a very, very strong labor market, but you have high inflation. As I mentioned, we're at the beginning of getting that down. If you look around the world, though, at other countries, they're also experiencing high inflation, including countries
غير
that
بلدان عم
that
بتواجه
didn't do as
تضخم
much as we
كمان
did, either
وأكثر
from a
بكتير
fiscal or
منا.
monetary standpoint. So that tells you, though, that a big part of this inflation is actually related to the pandemic itself, the shutdown and then the reopening. That's a big part of it.
التضخم تأثر كتير بأزمة الكورونا. هذا السبب
I
الرئيسي.
guess of the Fed. And what is your balance sheet now?
I think it's $8.4 trillion.
شو هو
Sounds like you know.
شو هي البالانس شيت تبعك؟ البالانس شيت يعني قد ايه عندكم أموال؟ 8.6
What
تريليون
would you like
دولار.
it to get down to over the next year or two? Is there some lower number?
So we are in the process of shrinking the balance sheet actively, actually passively, I should say. So what
حتى
happens
الآن
is
كلامه
Treasury
إيجابي.
securities on our balance sheet mature up to a cap, a monthly cap. The balance sheet shrinks in that amount. Same thing with mortgage-backed securities as they are prepaid or so the balance sheet shrinks.
لهلا
In
كلامه
terms of the
جميل منه
target
متشدد.
level of it, we haven't put a specific dollar number on it. The idea is we're in a regime of ample reserves. Reserves are basically deposits at the reserve banks. And when we get close to that level where we feel that reserves are ample, kind of where we were before the pandemic, then we'll slow down and we'll sort of test where we are. But it'll be a couple of years, we think, till we get to that level.
The Fed does not
بده
sell
وقت حتى يوصل
securities
للمراحل
when
قبل
banks mature,
أزمة الكورونا.
cash them in, right? You're not in the market selling securities that are not yet mature. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's also correct, though, that we've said we would consider sales of mortgage-backed securities, but I will tell you that's not something that is.
كانوا عم يفكروا يعرضوا mortgage backed securities.
People are worried about the federal debt limit.
ما في شيء يعني.
We might not be able to extend
أخي فينو مجرب قد ما فيني ساعدكم دايما
Are
معكم.
you a little worried about the debt limit not getting extended?
So the debt limit is really
الدين العام عم يحكوا عن الدين العام. هل أنت عتلين هم السقف الدين العام اللي وصلوا له 31 تريليون إنه ما يزيدوه؟ هيدي ما خصنا فيها. هيدي وزارة المالية هن اللي بيقرروا هذا الأمر والكونغرس.
in a timely fashion so that the U.S. can pay all of its bills when and as due.
مزبوط.
And if that doesn't happen, no one should think that the Fed has the ability to shield the financial markets or the economy from the consequences of moving too slow.
So you don't have any program in place ready to go if, in fact, the debt limit isn't passed in time.
This is something that Congress has to deal with.
هذا أمر الكونغرس بيتعاطى فيه مش نحن. ما خصنا نحن فيه.
Gold coin solution is not one you're in favor of, I guess.
as I said, this ends in only one way,
Okay.
and that way is Congress voting to
هيدا
raise the
قرار
debt ceiling so that
الكونغرس
the U.S.
الكونغرس
can
لازم
make all
يعمل
of our
قرار
Okay. In
when
terms of
وسقف الدين هو
consultation,
هو بيتحكم
do
فيه.
you consult regularly with the Treasury Secretary or the head of the National Economic Council or the President of the United States? How do you kind of relate to
هل
the
أنت بتعمل
administration?
اجتماعات
For a
دايما
long,
مع
long time,
الرئيس
you know,
مع
60 or
التريجري
70 years,
ديبارتمنت
I think there's
وزارة
been
المال
a
أو شيء؟
weekly breakfast or lunch with the Treasury Secretary and the Fed chair, and that's what I've had with Treasury Secretaries that I've had as Fed chair. I've also had regular, or call it irregular lunches with the head of the NEC. We also have regularly scheduled
أسبوعيا
lunches
مع
with the Council of
التريجري
Governors of
عم
the
يعمل
Fed. And
اجتماعاته
that's really
الأسبوعية
that's the
والشهرية
institutional
كيف عم
structure of our contact with
وقته
the
كيف
industry.
بيقسمه مع هيك
So,
عالم.
in the way the Fed works today, if you could reconstruct the operations of the Fed, you know, would you change the legislation any way? Would you think the Fed operates in a way that's as efficient as you can realistically operate?
We're not looking for any changes to the Federal Reserve Act.
ما
I
عم
mean, I think
نفكر
it does
بحيلا
work.
تغيير
The
بالفيدرال
structure that I
ريزيرف.
discussed earlier, where you've got the 12 Reserve Bank presidents coming in, what that assures, really, it institutionalizes diversity of thought. So we get different people coming in who've got different backgrounds, different careers, and they think different ways. And I think that's enormously beneficial to our decision-making process.
So there has been discussion recently about the Fed, some Fed members, Fed board presidents,
بس
selling their
لخبركم انا عاده
securities
ما بطلع على
and
الوقت
maybe not
على
very
الخمس
many
دقائق
members
والعشر
in the
دقائق، انا
industry
بطلع على
know.
الساعه
What
والنهار،
have you
ولكن
done to
لانه عم بيصير
fix that
المؤتمر لايف
process?
عم وطي
We put a
الوقت
new
هون
system in
على
place, set of rules in
على
place, which I
على
think are
الشاشه، لانه
best in class
اشياء
for a
بتاثر
public
بسرعه،
institution like
بنشوف
the
كيف عم
Fed.
يتحرك السوق
And
بطريقه اسهل.
you know, the innovations were that if someone wants to sell something that they own or buy something, they have to clear that in advance with staff at the board of governors, and then you've got to wait 45 days for that to execute. Also, you can't own individual stocks, and you can only
ممنوع
you can only authorize these transactions or execute them during
فرجيني
specific
الدولار
times.
شو عم يعمل، هو عم
And
يحكي
you know, it's a, and we disclose, of course, all of these are
هيك
publicly
الدولار
disclosed.
بوف، الدollar هبوط،
If your idea is to
الكريبتو
to
صعود.
trade things,
هيدا تاريخ
buy and
الامور،
sell them because you think, you know,
هذا
you
تاريخ
think this
الامور.
stock is cheap and that kind of thing, that's just not something that will work.
So what is the salary of the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board?
قد ايه معاشك؟
It's around $190,000, I believe.
تقريبا
So
شي
you're
190 200
$190,000.
ألف شيء.
If you need to sell something, what do? You have to clear it for 45
I do.
days? Or?
That's right. We've, you know, if we have family expenses that, if we have them, that exceed my salary, then we have to sell an
You
asset.
think that's a fair salary for the job? Or
I do, yes.
okay. So today,
هل تعتقد هذا معاش كافي للوظيفة؟
how do you coordinate with central banks, let's say in England or Japan or China? Do you have regular conversations with them
سيء
about what they're
الامور
doing?
We do.
سيء
And
للدولار،
I meet
كل شيء سيء
6 times a
للدولار،
year
ايجابي
in Switzerland with
للاصول
the heads of
الخطيره
all of
كلها، كريبتو
many
بيتكوين
central banks,
جميعا.
you know, even the small and medium-sized ones in Basel at the Bank for International Settlements. In addition, among the major central banks, I have regular dialogues going with most of them. And so what we're talking though about is really what's happening in the economy and how are you thinking about policy and that kind of thing. It's very important that we keep those discussions going, because particularly in a crisis, you're going to need to know each other, and you're going to need to know, you're going to be able to trust each other.
And do you
لازم
think the
نوثق
US
ببعضنا
economy
بها.
is pretty much in control of its own inflation rate, or are there events outside the United States like what China is doing or the UK
هل
is
في
doing that
أحداث
are
خارج الولايات المتحدة
making you
المعقولة
nervous
تأثر
about
على
where inflation might be going?
القرارات
We
وكل
have the
هالأمور؟
tools. The Fed has the tools to achieve our 2% goal over time.
عندنا الوسائل
But
لنوصل ل 2% مع الوقت.
inflation in the United States is, of
التضخم.
course, very closely related to things that happen here, including the balance between supply and demand.
نحن
It's also
التضخم عنا
affected by
بيأثر على
consumer
أمور عنا
commodity
إياهم
prices
نحن،
that are really set on the global markets, you know, oil and many agricultural
وعنا
goods
أشياء
that also
بتأثر
are
عليها
priced
الأمور العالمية
globally. So there
مثل
are certainly, it's an
النفط وغير
integrated
أمور.
global economy and global markets, and we are part of that.
So you get data from all the various government
مظبوط.
agencies, but you
محاور
ever use
ذكي
anecdotal
المحاور.
things like you go to the supermarket and you see prices are high and you say this price is high, or how do you ever get anecdotal things, or people ever call you up or friends and say, by the way, you should do this or that? Do you ever get that kind
هل
of
أصحابك
information, or do you
بدقوا
only
لك
get it
بيقولوا
from
لك لازم نعمل هيك
government
أو هيك؟
reports?
I mostly get data, but I will say I do believe that anecdotal information is very useful. And one of the things the reserve banks are great at is all 12 of them have big operations where they talk to businesses and nonprofits.
كل الريزيرف بانكس
every
بيحكوا مع
sector
كل
of the country,
الأعمال
and they bring that back
البزنسز،
to the
بيجيبوا
FOMC and talk
المعلومات
about what they're
بنقعد
seeing.
فيهم بالاف او ام سي
Often,
ونناقشهم.
but staring at data is great, but you need to have a story, and I think
نطلع على البيانات كتير مهم، بس لازم نعرف شو عم بيصير بالحقيقة.
assess what's going on out there.
So, as the chairman of the Federal Reserve is obviously an important job. How do you reduce the stress level you have? I mean, you can't be watching economic numbers all the time. So, what do you do to relieve the stress other than interviews like this?
كيف بتخفض ستريس يعني الضغط عليك لمقابلات مثل هيك والوضع العام. قال بيلعب موسيقى بيسوق البسكليت تبعه ما له علاقة هالأمر. بوم 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 صارت الدنيا.
You still play the guitar? Or you're still...
I do, yeah.
Your hair is awfully short for playing the guitar. Don't you need longer hair?
ماشي هلا عم يتساير وقت
It's too great too.
Okay.
لحديت هلا إيجابي.
The issue of what it's like to be chairman of the Fed. You can't go have regular friendship kind of dinners or meetings, can you, with people? People treat you much differently, I assume, than they used to, right? When you go to a restaurant, are people listening to what you're saying or something like that?
وقت روح على مطعم.
I have always thought that my jokes were funny, David.
ماشي عم يتساير وهبل.
I've never been a public figure before like this, and it's very different. But
أهلا أخي دكتور ناصر بشكرك خيي.
But yeah, when you go in public places, you have to be very careful about.
And does the president of the United States ever call you with any advice, or you don't really? Did President Trump ever call you, or
هل الرئيس الجمهوري بدق لك كرمال خدمات؟
President Trump did used to call me from time to time.
ترامب كان يدق لي من وقت لوقت.
No, I haven't had that kind of. I haven't gotten any calls from President Biden.
قال ما اجانا اتصالات من بايدن.
Is being able to keep a straight face, not telling people what you're going to do in the future, and look at the data and then come up with the right solution, right? That's mostly it.
I think the biggest challenge we face at the Fed is completing the process of getting inflation down to 2%. And what I want to point out is that we're seeing disinflation in the goods sector. We expect to see it in the housing services sector.
عم نشوف انخفاض بالتضخم بكتير امور بدنا نشوفها بالانخفاض بالهاوسنج سيكتور. هاوسنج يعني العقارات.
The rest of the services sector, it's the biggest part obviously. And we're not seeing disinflation there yet. And
وما عم نشوف انخفاض بمناطق السيرفيسز. بدنا انخفاض التضخم بالسيرفيسز بامور الخدماتيه.
So when you made your speech the other day, when you talked about the Fed discount rate, you used the word disinflation 11 times.
Hard luck لكل الدبب.
But 11 times. So you were saying that disinflation is beginning to appear. Would you use that word 11 times again today after the jobs report, or you would be less inclined to use that word so much?
I might use I might say I would certainly use the word disinflation, yes, which means
trading view أخي. trading view عم يسألني أي شو اسم الموقع اللي عم شوف فيه هذا بستعمل موقع trading view هذا شخصيا.
Total debt of the United States, which produces some inflation, 31.4, leaving aside the debt limit. Are you worried about the total indebtedness of the United States producing inflation, or you don't think that's a big problem?
Yeah, it's not the level of debt. I would say the thing I'd say about the level of debt is really
نسبة الدين
not the Fed's job, but
منا وظيفة الفيدرالي. هذا وظيفة الكونغرس لسقف الدين العام.
That has been the case for some time, and it's something we will have to deal with, and it's better to deal with it sooner rather than later.
Now, many of your predecessors were economists. You were trained as a lawyer. So they spoke in what I call
رئيس الاحتياطي الفيدرالي قبل هن اقتصادية أنت محامي.
Language which was done intentionally, I think, sometimes they would say. So you tend to speak in English. Has that been a plus, you'd say, when you're dealing with members of Congress, they can understand what you're saying?
I like to think so. You know,
أنت بتحكي بلهجة العالم تفهمها أكثر من السابقين.
In our system of government, unlike the parliamentary system,
عم يتسايروا هلا.
is to the legislature, is to Senate and the House, and particularly the two oversight committees, Senate Banking and House Financial Services. And I think it's very important that we respect that and explain what we're doing and listen to their concerns and share with them how we're thinking about things, and I think they appreciate that.
عم
And that
بتلاحظوا
is, we
هالمرحلة
have
هون
this
على الدولار
precious
كيف عم يرتد
independence. We
فيها
can't
كل
go from
مرة.
office. We serve these long terms. The other side of that has to be accountability, and the way for us to get accountability is to be as transparent as possible and try to reach
لحظة
the people of the United
هون
States through their
هون
elected
دايما في
representatives.
ارتداد عن
So this is a
هالمنطقة.
very high priority.
هذا اللي صار هون كمان.
So
لاحظوا
you
الارتداد
testify in
دغري
front of
كيف
Congress.
صار.
How much time does it take to prepare
عفوا
for
عم
that? Is that
بطلع على
1
التشارت
hour
أنه عم
preparation session, or is it
بفهمني أمر
1
التشارت شو
day
عم بيصير
session,
أنا
or
عم
a
بحضر.
1 week session?
You know, these are supposed to be monetary policy hearings under the Humphrey Hawkins Act, and they're actually on anything that's any political issue. So it's quite extensive. You have to prepare for everything that the Fed is involved in, and many things that the Fed is not involved in. So it's a lot of preparation.
So when you get questions from some members, you have to bite your tongue and say, "Why are you asking a question like that?" Or you never have that problem.
That never happens.
ما في
Okay.
شيء. ما
Okay.
عم
All right.
يمزح هيك
So
أسئلة
today, as
حرجة
you look
شوي.
at the country's economy, what is the biggest
أهلا
worry you
حبيبي.
have about inflation? Is it just that the fiscal policy is not completely under control? We have exogenous events outside. What is your biggest worry about inflation today?
Well, it's
شو أكبر
kind of what I was saying
شيء
earlier, which
بيقتلك
is
هم بخصوص
we're
التضخم.
just at the beginning of this process, right? Goods
بعدنا
inflation. So we
ببداية
need that process to
هالمرحلة.
continue. Goods, the whole thing began, the whole inflation began with people not being able to buy services, instead buying goods, and then global supply chains
المشكلة
collapsing.
بالتضخم
So
بلش
couldn't get goods, and prices of goods went
إنه
up. That's
أسعار
another story.
عليت ما
But
قدروا
that is
يشتروا
now
البضائع.
starting to get
هذا
better
اللي
as
بدأ.
supply chains are improving, and as
هلا
people
السبلاي تشين
rotate
بلشت
purchases
مسافة
back to
فتحت
services.
الصين، فتحت
You
كثير
move
دول،
on,
بلش
though,
الاستيراد
we're not
والتصدير.
seeing it yet in
هيدا
household services,
رح
which is
يحسن
the
الوضع.
rent or the ownership, the imputed costs of house ownership. But we expect to see that. So we need that to happen. That's another big part of the economy. It's got to come. It should come in the second half of this year. Then the biggest piece of it, and what I worry about the most, is when are we going to see disinflation, or
وين بدنا نشوف القسم الكبير وين بدنا نشوف disinflation يعني هبوط التضخم
The last thing
أكثر.
I worry about is just another exogenous event. It's a risky world out there.
الوضع خطر عالميا. الحرب، افتتاح الصين.
Those are things that can affect our economy and the path of inflation.
Right. So the balloon was not your worry, though. You don't care about the balloon.
ما انك عتلان هم البالون المنطاد البالون اللي انفجر عم يحكي معه.
gets data from all over the country, and are you convinced that you get the best data, you have the best data collection methods, or do you think it's not as modern as what Wall Street gets?
So most of the data that we get are just the same. You know, we don't
حركة هبوطية شوي للبيتكوين حاليا، بس بعد الصعود أقوى بكثير يعني على عم نحكي على الدقائق القصيرة.
What we get, which I think is better and different from what everybody else gets, is what I mentioned
شباب
earlier.
بتمنى تعملوا لي لايك وسبسكرايب للشانل. أنا نحن عم ننقل لايف والممنونكم.
No, not the beige book. The beige book. Yeah, the beige book. Putting together the beige book, and also coming in and you know, sharing the anecdotes and, you know, what they're hearing, what's happening with each district is different. You have agricultural districts and energy districts, and so that I think our anecdotal, but also just the haul of information we get through that.
كل المعلومات اللي بتجينا
I don't think anybody else has that.
ما حدا عنده المعلومات كلها اللي عنا إياها نحن.
I mean, obviously one is Secretary of the Treasury now, but Ben Bernanke, for example, or
I do. I talk to former Chairman Bernanke. I talk to.
بحكي مع الرؤساء اللي قبل. رؤساء الفيدرالي عم يحكي من المنطقة.
With your colleagues on the Fed board, and you disagree with them, do you say, look, I'm the chairman of the Fed, I am the person who has to make the final decision, and this is what we should do, or you don't quite do it that way?
بتقول لهم هيك لازم نعمل ولا لا؟ انه عم بتغيروا كيف تعملوا الامور؟ انا بقول لهم شو بعتقد. بشكرك اخي. لازم نوصل، هو بيحب النقاش، بنحكي مع الجميع وبنوصل لمحل معين، وعلى هذا الاساس نوصل لقرار معين. بس هدفنا الأساسي نخفض التضخم. هذا هدف أساسي.
I'll trade this for that. You never do that at the Fed when you're coming up with a decision. I'll do what you want if you do what I want. That doesn't happen ever.
اوكي عم نشوف باونس هون هبطنا هبوط منيح هلا عم نشوف باونس صغير صراحة هالشمعة اللي هون ما ارتحت لها كثير انا الكبيرة الشمعة الكبيرة اللي شفناها بالفوليوم بالكمية السيولة بالسوق ولكن كل شيء معقول.
of the board of the Federal Reserve Board, do you go to their office or do they come to your office?
بتروح انت لعندهم ولا هن بيجوا لعندك للفيدرال؟ على حسب ما بهم هون تساير ما في شيء يعني ما في شيء يعني عم بيكون جد بس.
The Fed has been pretty good at avoiding leaks of its decisions. How do you do that? Because most people in Washington are not so good at that. How do you avoid leaks?
We do have, we've got very strict rules around confidentiality, particularly around the written materials that we have. We publish these things internally for the FOMC meeting, the memos and the Teal book and all that. But the other thing to remember, though, is, we're not trying to hide our decisions from the public. We actually, in modern monetary policy, we want the public to understand how we think, how we're thinking, and if markets really understand how you're thinking and a new piece of data comes in, the markets will go, well, they're going to do this, and it sort of happens organically. And that happened all last year as we were, talking about raising rates. The market priced in rate increases long before we actually enacted them. So it's not, we want to be transparent. We're not looking.
نحن بنحب نكون واضحين ما بنحب نفاجئ الاسواق بيسعروا الامور اللي نعملها قبل ما نعملها نحن لانه نحن واضحين كثير.
Your press conference at 2 o'clock or something like that?
2:30.
2:30. So your decision is made by 2 o'clock or whenever it is.
قراراتكم بتنعمل قبل بنص ساعة من المؤتمر الاف او ام سي.
Very market sensitive information. How do you make sure nobody is calling their spouse and saying, guess what we're going to do?
Well, people take this very seriously. None of that happens. You're taking your professional life in your hands if you do something like that. I think people have a sense of self-preservation. So people are very careful about this information. There is a period of a couple of hours after the meeting and until we announce the decision, but we announced the decision at 2.
بنعلن النتيجة على 2 الكونفرنس 2:30 عادة للاف او ام سي.
That kind of know what happened and what we're going to say, and I just think everybody understands that.
الدولار بلش يطلع الدولار الامريكي شفته عمل باونس هون له فترة بيعمل باونس هون ليك ملا صعود عمله وهالشيء تزامن مع هبوط اذا لاحظتوا البيتكوين وقت يقوى الدولار بيهبط الاسواق الخطرة كل شيء بيتكوين واسهم كله بيهبط والعكس صحيح.
So we don't have the luxury of thinking about good or bad. It just is what it is. So, but I would say again, most analysts, most economists would say that to get inflation down from high levels that we've had, if you look at history, there is some softening in labor market conditions that goes along with that, and that is still, very possible and indeed likely here. Some softening in labor market conditions. However, this cycle is different from other cycles because
بتمنى عليكم لايك and subscribe.
It's just confounded all sorts of attempts to predict what it would do. So it is good that we have seen very strong labor market.
هالدورة غير كل الدورات اللي قبل لأنه قطع علينا أمور ما كان ولا فيدرالي قبل قدر يضطر يعني من الأزمة من الحروب من يعني كله مع بعضه إجا بشكل
Inflation is starting to come down and the labor market hasn't softened.
هلا التضخم بلش ينزل.
But it will do what it will do. Our job is to get inflation down to 2%.
هدفنا بعده عم بيركز هدفنا إخفاض التضخم لأقل من 2%.
Yes.
8 times. You pretty much know how the decision is going to come out before you actually get together because you've been talking to each other, or does the meeting of the FOMC change minds in ways that you might not have expected before the meeting started?
It depends on the meeting. I talk to each of the 18 other participants at least once.
بحكي مع كل المجتمعين على القليلة مرة.
The economy, how are you thinking about monetary policy, how are you thinking about the path forward and all of that. So in some meetings, I will say some of the time you get into a discussion at the meeting which suggests that maybe you should communicate
differently
about that. And we might actually take a break in the middle of the meeting and then go off with a smaller group and come back.
اوقات بنقسم حالنا عم بيحكوا كيف بيكون اجتماع الاف او ام سي يعني صراحة ما في شيء مهم. بشكرك اخي محمد.
Yes, all that.
No leaks.
No.
Okay. And today as you look forward, as we are going forward for the next remainder of this year, your basic view would be you'd be happy if the inflation rate
ليك
were to go
الدولار
down by
ليك
the end of the year to
بوف
2%, maybe unrealistic, but your core inflation now, or overall inflation, you think is about 4.5%, something like that, or what would you say it
عر-
is?
It's in that range. There are different measures.
Okay.
Yes, we expect significant progress on inflation this year, and again, it's our job to produce it. And I want to say again,
التضخم
we throw these
حاليا
numbers
بالأربع
out, but the
خمسة.
reality is we're going to react to the data. So if we continue to get
بالحقيقة نحن رح نعمل
reports of high
رياكشن رد فعل حسب المعطيات الجديدة اللي بتجينا على الأسواق. إذا المعطيات اجتنا إيجابية ولا سلبية بنعمل رد
So if I
فعل.
wanted to go get a mortgage on a house I was going to buy, for example, you would say I'm not going to be any better off waiting till next year than now.
على راسي أخي على الدين.
Rates aren't going to come down that much at the beginning of next year, so I might as well get the house now, mortgage.
So
عم يسألوا إذا بدي أشتري بيت هلا ما
for advice on those kind of things.
And you don't give any?
And I really can't.
Okay.
I really can't respond.
So,
ما في يعطي هلا معلومة ممنوع يحكي عن هالأمور.
Where you are, you're basically saying that the jobs data that came out was a little bit surprising, but in the end, you've taken into account, and you're pretty comfortable with the guidance you gave last time, and you're not prepared to give anything that's completely different guidance than you gave last week.
Well, I mean, this is a world in which we've had the labor market report, and I think that does.
شوف الدولار شو عم بيصير فيه، ليك الدولار عم بيطيح عم يطلع والبيتكوين انهبط.
That we have a significant road ahead to get inflation down to 2%, and I think there's been an expectation that it'll go away quickly and painlessly, and I don't think that's at all guaranteed. That's not the base case. The base case is for me is that it will take some time.
بده ياخذ وقت.
We'll have to do more rate increases, and then we'll have to look.
وبدنا نزيد الفوائد أكثر. هاي سلبية، هاي جملة سلبية منيح.
2% is the rate we had for the last 25 years before inflation came along, but prior to that, for most of U.S. history, we were higher than 2%. Is it that 2% is we're now
قطعت فترة كثيرة نحن أعلى من 2%. ليه مركز على 2%؟
So we went through this long period where inflation was really anchored around 2%, and we think that
قطعنا مرحلة طويلة التضخم كان ثابت تقريبا على 2%.
In a way, if everyone expects that prices are going to go up, prices and wages are going to go up 2% per year, then plus productivity in the case of wages, then it will. That's what will happen. Having price stability, real price stability,
يكون عندنا الثبات بالأسعار
enormously beneficial to the public, because you can then on the back of that you can build
إيجابي كتير إيجابي كتير للمجتمع العادي، لأنه بيقوي الوضع الاقتصادي وفيكم فينا نبني على هالأساس. إذا كان أعلى التضخم بصير الأسعار، الويجز المعاشات تعلى، الأسعار تعلى، كل هالأمور ما في أسعار ثابتة للمستهلك يقدر يبني.
Some people say because we don't have as many immigrants coming into the country, legal immigrants
coming
some of the jobs that otherwise would take. You think immigration is an issue in terms of giving us more labor workers, or you think that's not a factor?
So just as a matter of arithmetic, it was a factor because there was very little migration across borders during the pandemic. And that was part of what was happening, particularly in certain sectors like the agricultural sector and food service and things like that, where there just weren't the people.
However, like and subscribe, please.
Just very recently here, the immigration data have turned up again. And I think that may be part of why people are feeling somewhat less pressure in the labor market to find workers. This is an issue not for the Fed, though. This is immigration is obviously a political issue.
هلا عم يحكوا عن الهجرة ليه؟ لأنه بعد الكورونا كل البلدان حتى البلد اللي أنا فيه شو عم بيصير؟ الهجرة بطلت تجي على البلدان بسبب الكورونا. اليد العاملة قلت، مشان هيك عم تزيد اليد العاملة وين ما كان. مثلا أنا بالبلد اللي أنا فيه صعب كتير نلاقي يد عاملة بكتير أمور بسبب لأنه ما في لا ستودنتس لا تلاميذ عم يجوا من أوفرسيز ولا هجرة. بشكرك أخي فهد، من أشد المتابعين إلي. خالد كمان.
working on.
All right. Well, I think I haven't been able to get you to say anything you didn't want to say. I would say, Jay, I've known you a long time. I think you've done a great job in a difficult situation. I appreciate your service to the country at $180,000 a year, or whatever the salary is, something like that. So thanks very much for being here, and thank you for your service.
بشكرك على كل شيء وبشكرك على اللي عم تقدم لنا اياه. هيدي هي المقابلة. بالملخص قال انه بملخص المقابلة قال انه رح يضل يزيد فوائد، هدفه يوصل ل 2%. كان في ايجابيه، شويه ايجابيه بالحكي انه الوضع الاقتصادي جيد بالرغم من كل شيء. العالم توقعت، حتى يعني عدة عالم من الفيدرالي حكيوا، العالم بيشتغل مسؤولين بالفيدرالي قالوا من وراء ارقام الوظائف الاسواق كلها ناطره. كلمه باول متوقعين يكون في تشدد بالحكي، هيك العالم كانت قايله. ولكن نسبيا كان يعني في ايجابيه وسلبيه. هو دائما باول هيك بتحب يضيع الاسواق لحتى ما ينعرف شو عم بيصير. ولكن الخطه بعدها ماشيه. الخطة بعدها ماشية. شو هي؟ بده يضلوا يزيد الفوائد ليلجم التضخم ليوصل ل 2%. هذا الهدف تبعه، حكي عنه أكثر من مرة. ولكن الاقتصاد بعده وضعه قوي. يعني هذا كل الأمور اللي قاله كثير مركزة انه بده يخفض التضخم ل 2% تحت حيال شيء. بس هو مراوغ. معك حق اخي ابراهيم، مراوغ مهم، وبيحب دايما يحكي عن هالمواضيع. يعني دايما ما بتعرف منه. انا امبارح على التليجرام تبعي حكيت ما بتعرف منه لا حق ولا باطل. يعني دايما طريقة بيحب يضيع الاسواق. سيرندبتي بشكرك، عم ضلك تذكر العالم او بشكرك عم ضلكم تذكروا العالم يعملوا لايك وسبسكرايب. ما بعرف، بتمنى على الجميع يعمل لايك وسبسكرايب. انتوا شو رايكم؟ خلينا هيك نعمل دردشه سريعه، ما رح طول كتير. انا اوجه الضوء هون. انا صراحه يا اخ نادر اشوف سلبيه اغلب من الايجابيه. ليك في اثنين هلا ما رح نعرف 100% للاجتماع الثاني شو بده يصير. بعد في ارقام بدها تطلع ناطرينا. ولكن هدفه ما عم يتغير. المسج، الجملة ما عم تتغير. هي انه ما بده يوطي التضخم ل 2%. وال2% ليوصل منا شيء بالسهل. بس على فكرة منه هالامر السهل كثير، ولكن هذا هدفه وما عم بيغير. مشان هيك عم بتضل المسج ذاتها، بس العالم تقريها بطريقة مختلفة. اوكي، رح هيك بدكم اراء، كلها اراء. طيب اخواتي، بشكركم على كل شيء. ان شاء الله انبسطتوا بالنقل. بتمنى تعملوا لايك وسبسكرايب، وانا بشوفكم اليوم بفيديو جديد وماركت ابديت جديد. يلا اخي.